rising sun, comfort me through all the pain that life may bring. There's no other hope that I can lean upon. Lead me, Lord, lead me all my life. Walk by me across the lonely roads that I may face. Take my arms and let your hand show me the way. Show the way to live inside your heart all my days, all my life. You are my light, you're the lamp upon my feet. All the time I know I need you there. You are my light, I cannot live alone. Let me stay by your guiding love all through my life. Lead me, Lord.
Good day. This is the last lesson that we will have for our first quarter. And this is all about using figurative language. And let us not delay this anymore. Let's just get into the discussion. Ain't it ironic that even though reality stands before our very eyes, sometimes we cannot see it. And even sometimes we don't want to believe it. Sometimes common words were not enough to describe such a reality. And when that happens, we turn to figurative language for emphasis, for highlighting its importance, or for capturing its effects on us. For example, if someone declares to you that you are my sun, my moon, my universe, he or she is using figurative words. That person is trying to tell you how extraordinary and special you are in a way that could not be accomplished by simply saying you are extraordinary and special, which is a very big no, because if you really want to say that this person is special, you need to compare him or her on something that is really special to you, which is the sun, the moon, and even the universe. By being likened to the sun or the universe, that person is describing to you how much you've expanded to his or her world by using just words. But these mere words hold the force of figurative language. You see, you've been compared to the sun, which is a very vital part of our lives. You've been compared to the moon, which is a very vital part of the world itself, and the universe, which is very, very important because having no universe means that we are not even alive right now. See, that is how important you are to that person. And he showed it, or he or she showed it to you through the use of figurative words. Now, you may ask, why not just say it in plain words? Well, words actually are not always plain or simple. Take the definition of words. The dictionary gives the following possible definition of words. For example, it could be the language, the vocabulary, even the expressions or terms, something that is said or something that is written, or word could also be a command. Depending on a particular moment, a word takes on a different meaning. For instance, one can express the sense of urgency or seriousness of talking to you by curtly saying, I want to have a word with you. And from those words, you can tell very well that you are going to expect or hear more than just that word, or that person really, really wants to talk to you. Now remember that figurative language is not intended for literal reading and understanding. Similes, metaphors, and personification help the readers visualize and experience our moments in real time. Through figurative language, your words become more persuasive, convincing, and significant to the readers. In using figurative language, you show and tell. For example, when Typhoon Yolanda hit the Philippines in 2013, authorities described it as a super typhoon to highlight how catastrophic and destructive its impact. Super makes for a compelling portrayal of the mighty force of Typhoon Yolanda. Authorities warned of a storm surge, which people in the affected areas could not even understand. They could not imagine it. Only after seeing that it was like a tsunami did people understand what a storm surge was, and many would say that had the storm surge been described to them as being tsunami-like, they would have understood it better. They knew a tsunami because they had seen it in a media coverage when it struck Japan. Now, we saw here how figurative language plays an important part on showing the readers or on showing other people what you really meant. For the instance of the super, when the term super was coined with the word typhoon, it meant for something that is much more catastrophic, much more difficult to deal with compared to our normal typhoons here in the Philippines. And when the storm surged, just like what other people said, if only the term storm surged was described using figurative language such as simile, as a tsunami-like or like a tsunami, then people would really actually know what a storm surge is. And that is how figurative language would help you, the author, to address the readers on what you want them to know. Got it? Now, remember that nature in particular, though concrete and specific, is also abstract and intangible. Because of its unpredictability, we know that the sun, wind, trees, or leaves, we know all of them, but we don't have a precise picture of their connections to each other and to us as humans. We can only imagine such a picture and we picture it through figurative language. Now, let's see how G.K. Chesterton, an English writer, poet, journalist, and philosopher, uses metaphor in his ironic and humorous essay entitled Back in the Fog, written way back on 1935. The dome of sky above Dublin was clear with the awful clarity of a burning glass, and such a glaring gap or rent in the grey skies of Ireland was itself a portent, with some savour of a miracle. But though it was very rare in Dublin climate, it was curiously representative of the Dublin mentality. And I, who love both countries, but my own best and with most anxiety, could not help saying to myself, this is always the real Dublin light. And the moment I return home, I shall find myself in the London fog. The difference is indescribable, but that is the nearest description. There is more hatred in Dublin, and yet there is a harder sense of obligation of justice. There is even more slander in Dublin, and yet in some strange way there is more truth. What there is in London is something that is not so much falsehood as falsification, and not so much falsification as simply a fog. After a week in Ireland, the newspaper politics of England seemed to be like a vast vapour, inhabited only by phantoms. There is no question of hating men or slandering men, for they are not the same men for 10 weeks together, and they are never the real men at all. Londoners live in a fog of journalism, out of which there looms from time to time a figure who strikes certain special attitudes and then vanishes in the fog and is forgotten. Not many years ago we saw start out of the mist, like the pale face of a fiend, the face of a traitor. He was reeling and ragged as if torn by patriot mobs. A golf club was broken in his hand, as if it had been broken across his head. When he was expelled for treason from his club of fashionable golfers, he had been detected in a dastardly effort to escape to Stockholm and make a treacherous peace, and was only frustrated by the gallantry of our British stars. Well, this person, after throwing himself into a few bodily postures expressive of moral baseness and political perfidy, vanished in the fog and was never seen again. This was the infamous James Ramsay MacDonald, of atrocious memory. Only as it happens there has been a slight lapse in the memory. The crowd waiting in the fog, however, has had other diversions. Perhaps it is quite right that they should none of them be remembered, for none of them ever really existed at all. There never was any traitor named MacDonald who betrayed his country to its enemies, any more than there was ever any patriot called MacDonald who preferred his country to his party. All these shadows in the shadow pantomime of London politics have no reference to the respectable, rather vain, self-respecting Scotsman on the make, who has risen in the profession of politics rather less scandalously than most. That is what I mean by the London fog, and that is what I mean by the Dublin light. Buck in the Fog by G.K. Chesterton. On this example, we saw how different figures of speech can be used to discuss a perspective or explain an idea. One of the figures of speech used is what we call a metaphor. A metaphor is simply defined as an implicit comparison, wherein you select a word or phrase and replace it with another word or phrase. The only rule is that at least one common trait or quality should be present in the words or phrases being compared for the metaphor to work effectively. A metaphor usually contains a tenor, which is the intended meaning of the image, and a vehicle, or the image that communicates the meaning. Thus, a metaphor has three underlying elements. The first one is the original image or the object being described, which is A. B is the actual image or the object used to describe letter A. And C, the similarity between A and B, which we call as the tenor. For instance, fog is the original image, which is A, that is being compared to London, which is the vehicle or our letter B. And the similarity between the fog and London suggests forgetfulness or confusion, which is our letter C or tenor. In this example, the fog is the vehicle, while the image of confusion is the tenor. And that is metaphor. Now, let's have simile. Simile is of course the opposite of metaphor, for it makes a direct comparison between two different images or objects. It is from the Latin word for likeness or similar. It uses like or as for comparison. For example, she roars like a tiger. The dog wails like a siren. It looked like a tsunami. And she smiles like the stars at the night. These are just a few examples of using a simile. Like metaphor, simile has an ABC or the original object, the vehicle, and the tenor that visualizes for the readers what you wrote in words. And last but not the least, we have personification. Personification ascribes human traits to things that are not human. Similar to metaphor and simile, it compares two different things, human and non-human. A human into a not living thing. Personification is particularly effective in making concrete and specific something that is abstract and conceptual. For example, the concept of justice. We might say that justice is blind and deaf if we are not happy with the judgment on crimes committed against us or onto another person. In this instance, we are already personifying justice as a blind and deaf person. If you have no friends, but have lots of money to pay for fun and pleasure, you could say to yourself that I can only count money as my real friend. Here, you've just made money a person. In fact, your friend. It is easy for us to give objects human-like traits because objects are the things that actually surrounds us. We take care of them, we cherish them, and feel sad if they get lost. The same can be said for animals, which we often describe as having human-like thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, especially in fables and poetry. But remember that ascribing human-like traits to animals is called anthropomorphism. It is not personification, which only applies to inanimate objects and non-living things. Once again, personification is ascribing human traits to any inanimate things. Since animals are already living, they are not under personification, or they are not an example of personification. Let's take an example of personification that explains an abstract idea. Let me read to you how Mabel Osgood Wright, an American nature writer and children's book author, wrote The Ways of the Wind way back in 1960 using personification. The Ways of the Wind by Mabel Osgood Wright. Whenever a piece of land is to be set apart for a garden, two mighty rulers must be consulted as to the boundaries. These rulers are the sun and the wind. The sun, if the matter in hand is once fairly spread before him and put in his charge, is a faithful guardian, meeting frankness frankly and sending his penetrating and vitalizing messengers through well-nigh inviolable shade. But of the wind, who shall answer for it or trust it? Do we really ever learn all of its vagaries and impossible possibilities? If frankness best suits the sun, diplomacy must be our shield of defense windward. For the wind is not one but a composite of many moods, and to lure one on, and skilfully but not insultingly bar out another, is our portion. To shut out the wind of summer, the bearer of vitality, the uplifter of stifling vapors, the disperser of moulds, would indeed be an error. Therefore, the great art of the planters of a garden is to learn the ways of the wind and to make friends with it. What does it matter if violet or pansy frames are set up in a sunny nook? If it be one of the wind's winter playgrounds, where he drifts the snow deep for his pastime, so that after each storm of snow or sleet a serious bit of engineering must be undergone before the sashes can be lifted and the plants saved from dampness. But there are some things that belong to the never never land and may not be done here. You may plant roses and carnations in the shade or in dry sea sand, but they will not thrive. You cannot keep upland lilies cheerful with their feet in wet clay. You cannot have a garden all the year in our northern latitudes, for nature does not, and you cannot afford to ignore the ways of the wind, for according as it is kind or cruel, does it mean garden life or dead. The ways of the wind. By using personification, our author Mabel Osgood Wright imparted human qualities to the wind, making the wind's intangible ways concrete to us, the readers or listeners. It also made us realize not to treat the wind lightly. Wright created a light and casual atmosphere for the wind, but personification gives the wind a lethal or life-giving power. Now, looking back, remember that figurative language, like metaphor, shapes our thoughts and ideas by grounding them in our body. It provides an experiential framework in which we can accommodate abstract concepts. Thanks to metaphor, we can reduce and therefore understand abstract concepts to our physical experiences and to our relationship with the external world. Metaphor, therefore, is an intermediary between our conceptual representation of the world and our sensory experience of the world. That is said by Piero Scaruffi on his book The Nature of Consciousness back on 2013. This just show how a figure of speech, particularly metaphor, can show and can help us as authors to discern or to show other people, the readers or the viewers, what we are really feeling, what we want them to know, to see, to feel. I do hope you got it, because now we will have your activity for today. Open and complete the worksheet entitled Lesson 5 or 9 underscore creative nonfiction underscore Sir Michael underscore worksheet number 5. And that worksheet is this one. Here is the worksheet that you're going to accomplish, and just like what we always do, we put our name, the section and the strand that we are enrolled in, and here's the directions. Let me read it for you. Think of at least 5 animals. For part 1, 5 animals. And plants for part 2, to which you can compare yourself. Then, make a 1 to 3 sentences comparison piece from it. So that's it for your worksheet number 5, animals and plants, and just make a comparison between you and them. And now let's go back to our PowerPoint and see what will be your performance task number 2. For your performance task number 2, through creativity and proper utilization of multiple genre elements, I want you to develop a short piece. No, actually, I want you to develop the short piece draft you created as beta number 1. We're going to use the characters, the characterization, the unfolding of a plot, the incorporation of what you've learned, even the figures of speech. If you can do it, just incorporate it on your performance task number 1. And all in all, what I want you to do is improve your previous literary composition. And that's it for your performance task number 2. Good luck, and yeah, I'll see you on the next one, which is on our first lesson for quarter number 2. Bye!